Unstained. Join me as I do interviews with leaders in the field of artificial intelligence from across the world. We speak about the business relevance of artificial intelligence, and we also speak about the future. Is it to be feared or to be embraced? Please subscribe at my website for updates on future interviews. Superabundance, superdemocracy, infrasonic healing, hallucinogenic substances, the future of education, and artificial intelligence. These sound like topics of an interesting conversation, and that is exactly the conversation I had with David Wood, a futurist, author of several books, a singularitarian, sought-after public speaker. I was fascinated by the topics we covered and by David's insights. Listen in as we unpack these very interesting topics. David, thank you so much for joining us. There's so much to talk about from a futuristic point of view. What I want to start off with is asking you the following. My son is 6 years old. He has now learned how to use Siri on his iPad. He's learned how to hijack my Google Home, and he's switching on and off some of the IoT devices in my house, which I'm glad that he's doing at a young age. But if he should ask me, Dad, what is the future that you and your generation is leaving us when it comes to this kind of technology that we're speaking about today? What is a truthful answer you think I can give him?
Well, the first answer is it's still all to play for. We could use the technologies of Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and many more to create a world in which few of us need to work long hours, in which there won't be any back-breaking or soul-destroying employment. Instead, most of us will be able to do wonderful things most of the time, early retirement, if you like, living like the aristocrats of old. Yes. That is one scenario. But equally, if we mishandle the technology and if we use it to see growing inequality, we see a declining flourishing of large percentage of the population, we may regret what has happened. And so the future is up to what we see and what we do.
What is if I can say, the worst case scenario? Is this going to destroy us eventually, do you think, if we make the wrong decisions?
We're already seeing some hints as to what can happen with people using artificial intelligence to further their own ends. Sometimes it's commercial ends, sometimes it's political ends, sometimes it's criminal ends, sometimes it's terrorist ends. All these people have reasons to harm the wider community, and they may be grateful for greater weaponry at their disposal. Once upon a time, if you wanted to rob somebody, you could only rob one or two people at a time. Then we developed the railway, and you could have a highway robbery of a whole rail train, and so it goes. So with greater technology comes greater power. And it's not just that people may be malicious, they may also inadvertently let genies out of the bottle, as it were. Some of the worst examples we've seen of malware or ransomware running havoc probably weren't intended to have these effects, but the software didn't quite work as intended, so to speak. And it was something that benefited nobody and left many hospitals unable to function for a while. Another case shut down for a while, Sony Pictures, due to their having annoyed the leadership of North Korea, who didn't like a film that Sony Pictures was producing, and they unleashed malware there too. So that's just a hint as to what might happen. And as technology becomes more powerful and more pervasive, the stakes become even higher.
Okay. If we were waiting for a plane together and we started chatting and I said, so David, so what do you do for a living? How would you answer that question?
I'm trying to help people to think more productively, more seriously about the future. helping people to realize that the future may be quite different from a simple extension of current trends, helping people to overcome future shock and think about which trends are credible and which trends are desirable, bearing in mind that a lot of our instinctive reactions can mislead us because our instincts are grounded in our experience of the past, whereas what's possible in the future may be very different.
Mm. And when you say you're a futurist, or when people say that, is that all about, I guess, predicting what the future holds? I guess there's a lot of philosophical elements to it. What would you say is a futurist?
So we're not just in the business of predicting what we think will definitely happen. We're in the business of raising people's awareness to possible futures, because frankly, nobody can reliably predict the outcomes of the future. There's too much uncertainty. Small little changes can cascade in completely unpredictable ways. But take the example of a pandemic. We couldn't predict with any confidence that 2020 would be the year in which a pandemic would be so widespread. But futurists have said that pandemics will come sooner or later, and they may be difficult to handle. So we should prepare in advance so that if a pandemic does happen, we'll know what to do about it. It's likewise if you're on a boat, you can't be sure when a big wave may come, but you do need to know where the lifeboats are, and you may have some provisions packed just in case you are knocked overboard and you know which direction you want to swim. So we want to point out the risks that are in the landscape in case it's too late to do anything about them by the time they strike. But even more important, we want to point out the opportunities that are in the landscape, which, if we are slow to see, might slip out of our grasp and then we've missed them. So that's what futurists are trying to do, help people to change what they're doing now on account of a wider understanding of future possibilities.
So I know you do a lot of public speaking. You also authored a number of books, which I would like to cover on this conversation. From a earning a living point of view, if I may ask that, is that mostly consulting, helping organizations to plan for the future, or what would you say is the answer to that question?
So most of my income would come from consulting, which is talking with companies, usually, occasionally with organizations, that's non-commercial organizations, to help them think through future scenarios and to help them start off innovation practices, agile development practices. But in reality, I only have a small proportion of my time that I can bill out in such a way. I've sort of semi-retired. I'm still living on income from my days at the heart of the smartphone industry. It's only maybe 20% of my time that I'm engaged in consulting.
Hmm.
The rest of the time, I'm trying to have a discussion with the public or aspects of the public so that we are all, as a society, better prepared for what may or may not happen in the future. So I
Yes.
run London Futurists, which is a public meetup. It's a cash neutral organization with very little costs involved. I also sit on a number of boards. And yes, I do write. I've written or edited 9 books, but I can tell you I'm not rich at all from any of the writing activities I've done. Perhaps I should be wiser and hire a marketing person, but I'm writing for the sake of changing the future rather than trying to make an income from it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful altruistic motivation, which I think is good and it's needed. I think unless you're somebody like Stephen King, I don't think people are going to make millions from writing books, but I do think it gives one credibility and exposure. So one of your books is called Sustainable Abundance for Everybody, which is a fascinating title. Maybe take us through some of your books and some of the messaging that you have in there.
So the one you've just mentioned, Sustainable Superabundance, Universal Transhumanist Invitation, it's basically saying that if we are smart enough, we can use the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, sometimes called, to take human experience all around the world to a significantly higher level of experience, of free, clean energy, almost free clean energy, of nutrition for everyone, without needing to have large parts of the earth turned over to agriculture, growing cattle. We can instead grow meat synthetically, and we won't need, most of us, to work much of the time, because if we are smart, we can use AI and robots to do most of the work that we humans currently do, and they will do it more efficiently. They will do it much less expensively, and it will produce enough for everybody to have a really good quality of life without having, as I say, to spend much time ourselves working. So that's the broad vision. But I'm very plain in all of the books that I write that it's by no means a certainty, and that there are many things that can go wrong on the route to sustainable superabundance, particularly if we are too dominated by short-term thinking, or if we let some of our human nature, which is a mixed thing, which has great angelic aspects, to quote Abraham Lincoln, who wrote about the better angels of our nature, but also, well, demonic aspects. You know, when things get tough, sometimes we behave in very bad ways towards each other. We evolved in part to cooperate, but in part to become experts at deceiving each other. It's not a very flattering view of human nature, but there's something in that.
Yes.
And we evolved also to take advantage of opportunities to exploit power. And so all of these things can be made worse. Our tribal instincts have saved us in the past. It generally was wise in the past to be nervous and apprehensive about people who were different from us. That was a useful evolutionary instinct. But that instinct is today very dangerous. And so we need to transcend some of these instinctual reactions. And if we can do that, then we can truly build, I call it the superabundance. It's not just an extension of what we have today. It's not just more of what we have. It is more people living at a higher level, enjoying sports, creativity, entertainment, music, literature, immersion in 3D reality. It's quite possible that, you know, some of our children or our family members today spend hours at a time lost in online gaming. Well, we might get lost for weeks or months at a time in the future, and we might think it's actually exhilarating and wonderful to do it. That's one possible future, but my goodness, there's a lot of short-term issues to solve first.
Absolutely. I looked at a lot of your public talks in preparing for this session. What I like about it, firstly, I think you explain this technology and where it's going very well, especially to a non-technical kind of an audience. But also the underlying message for me and all the talks I looked at is a positive view, mentioning the potential problems. But, you know, I don't think there's a pessimistic, it's an optimistic, let's grab this, let's move forward. So I encourage all the viewers of this video to look at those talks. Obviously, I'll post your website and all of that, David. Something that I also see almost everyone who interviews you asks you about, because it's such a strange word, is transhuman, which can make people think of so many different things. But what does that mean, if you have to explain it in simple terms?
So the trans stands for transcend. It's to transcend parts of human nature, which we now believe we can do better than. So evolution had many compromises. Evolution was wonderful, but also terrible. Evolution has given us many instincts, such as a sweet tooth, which made sense long ago, but which aren't helpful today.
Yes.
And evolution couldn't do various things like help us to live much longer. It is a tragedy when we are in the prime of our life and then we get cut down by disease or debility of one sort. So in history, one of the greatest things we humans have done is extend the average lifespan. 200 years ago, the average lifespan was something like 30. Today, around the world, it's more than 70. It could be much higher than that. And I'm not just talking about people living out lives in an elderly, diminished state. I'm talking about people being as healthy at the age of 120 as the average 30-year-old is today. So we transhumanists talk about super longevity, meaning super health. We talk about super intelligence, which means we transcend some of our stupidity. or psychologists call it cognitive biases. You know, they are rules of the thumb which served us well in the past, but again, don't serve us well. And Wikipedia's got long lists of all the kinds of shortcuts in our thinking which actually lead us to bad decisions. So superintelligence, the third super, is sometimes called super happiness or super well-being, is to transcend some of our tendencies to depression, alienation, to egoism, and to so on. And frankly, it is a real crisis in the world. There's another pandemic looming, which is the pandemic of ill health. It's the pandemic of emotional dysfunction. But we transhumanists think we should be able to transcend that as well. And some of us transhumanists talk about a fourth super, which is a super democracy. It's better ways of organizing society so that everybody has a fair chance, and so that the opinions and insights of diverse points of view are respected and the best ideas have a chance to come to the surface, rather than, as often happens today, being drowned out by the loudest or more powerful voices, or distorted by people using today's AI to create fake news and conspiracy theories. So in all these aspects, transhumanists look to humans evolving human nature, if you like, by intelligent design, rather than just by relying on the blind watchmaker, which has got us here already.
Yes, I think you know, a lot of people who speak about this technology speaks predominantly about the technology, but I think the psychological, sociological, potentially spiritual aspects of it and of our future is a lot more important than where cloud technology is going or natural language processing or something like that. I often wonder, because I'm alluding to what you said earlier, I think our fundamental human nature might not change with this kind of technology. You know, we can talk about Maslow's triangle, for instance, or those kind of things. I do wonder if how it's gonna impact the way we look at ourselves. If you think of implants, if you think of cyborgs, if you would. So if part of me is machine and part of me is human, would people still have a need for spirituality, for instance? So let's talk about the almost the non-technical side, the human side. Is where do you think that's going? You've already answered some of that, but basic human that I am and that others are, how's this technology going to change us? Do you think we fundamentally will stay what we are, or will it change our fundamental nature potentially?
Well, we're using technology all the time to change our nature. Consider widespread access to contraception. You know, in the past, most women in a relationship would have their children every few years. Now, women have got the choice whether to become pregnant or not. So that's one way in which we have changed what previously was a fundamental part of most women's lives. We have antibiotics, which makes our body stronger. We have various understanding of diet, how to have a clearer mind. We can, in the future, potentially use more drugs, perhaps some hallucinogenic drugs, perhaps some nootropic drugs, in each case carefully administered, not in a reckless way, but each of these could contribute to higher levels of consciousness. And of course, people still have the traditional routes available to them of meditating and yoga, but it can turn out that we can get to the same levels of consciousness more reliably, more quickly, using various technological help. Even playing music of the right kind can help put us into the right mood. There are other kinds of ways in which vibrations of different sorts, infrasonic, for example, infrasonic vibrations applied to the body can affect something called the vagus nerve, which connects the head, the brain, the heart, the lungs, and main organs. So that can help us reach the same kind of end goal as very experienced meditators, but much more reliably. Then, as I've said, there are the various potions, the magic mushrooms, the different potential hallucinogenic substances, which have their drawbacks. And I'm not advocating people experiment recklessly, but in the future, as we understand more what's involved, we might find people reaching more reliably the kinds of states that currently only a few lucky gurus or similar people occasionally reach. We might reach it much more often. And once we reach there, we may find yet more levels of consciousness to ascend to. And we look back at today's level a bit like we look at some of the strange practices of past centuries, when we put young boys up chimneys, when we had slaves, when we routinely had capital punishment and so forth. And now we shudder almost. How could we do such things? In a sort of similar way, we might shudder in the future at our present practices. So hopefully we'll do so with compassion.
Absolutely. And that's the most important thing, I think, is to use this for good, altruistically. David, what are you working on? Any book at the moment? I mean, what's your future plans? And I would say in the short term, conferences, other books, potentially other angles of this kind of technology.
So I'm not yet writing another book. My most recent one came out at the beginning of this year. It was RAFT, which stands for Roadmap to Abundance, Flourishing and Transcendence by 2035. It sets out 16 goals for what the world could do very differently between now and 2035. And it also sets out short-term interim stepping stones by 2025. So that's still making its way through people's reading. But what I am still focused on is looking at how can we have better politics and how can we have better education. If anything, these are possibly the two most important technologies of all. Better politics means that we are less prone to argue over partisan or tribal lines, and that we're more willing to see the insights in each other's point of view and build a better democracy. And education means that we have to recognize that many things that are in our current educational systems are there for historic reasons. And the educational establishment has had many changes, but probably hasn't had enough of the fundamental changes. We can do a whole lot more education by what we're now discovering as a result of the lockdown. Quite a lot can be done online. There's more to be done there with various edutech, but even more than changing the mechanisms of teaching, is changing the content of teaching. And so we need a syllabus fit for the 2020s. So if I were to write a new book, that's one of the things it might be, the syllabus fit for the 2020s. Or another title I have in mind is Uplifting Education. And
yeah, so relevant. And again, as a parent of a young child, it's imperative that we change their future and their education. In this time that my son was at home during the lockdown, his school would send videos through Dropbox or whatever, and then I would homeschool him essentially. But I looked at the quality and the content of some of the lectures, and I thought, this is as old as when I was young 40, 50 years ago, and I'd rather actually him play on his iPad doing puzzles and learning the skills of critical thinking. So I can see that there's a massive problem with the curricula he's at even this young age being exposed to. So it's absolutely irrelevant.
well, there are some timeless classics. There are some things made in the 50s which are still worthwhile watching. But no, I'm with you. There are many better ways to educate. Now that we understand what's happening inside young children's brains, now that we appreciate that actually different people prefer to learn in different ways, we can have personalized education, a bit like we have the vision of personalized medicine. Not everybody responds to the same drugs in the same way. Not everybody responds to infections in the same way. Not everybody responds to dietary supplements in the same way. So hence personalized medicine and likewise personalized education, which can be informed by also some neurofeedback. So in the future, these things I'm wearing on my head today, which is just a microphone and a speaker, in the future, they'll be monitoring what's going on in my brain as I'm speaking, and there'll be other mechanisms so that AI tutors, the systems that's running education, will adapt in real time. And you're quite right too, games have a lot to do with this, talking about the discipline of serious games, which is that people can really love playing the games, but as a result of playing the games, they learn very vital skills along the way. That's often how it is. People who play darts, they become very good at mental arithmetic, astonishingly good, even though they didn't learn it or care much for it at school. And so on it goes. That's just one simple example.
Yes, I think the things we're talking about and the work you're doing, David, is exceptionally important. And I really want to encourage everyone who's looking at this to read those books. I'm going to put some of the Amazon links, obviously your website link on there, and to look at some of the other recorded and future talks. It's imperatively important for our future that we listen and learn from people like you. So I want to thank you for your time, David. And I really would like in a few weeks, if you have time, to unpack some of the topics we spoke about today, because it is so very important.
Well, you're quite right. This is a very big conversation. We need to split it up into chunks and get people to look stage by stage at what are the real implications in each area of social and human life.
Absolutely.
I'd be delighted to come back.
Fantastic. Thank you for your time, David.
Thank you.